We have Wunderman Thompson's Justin Peyton with us today. He's going to do a quick presentation for you. If you have any questions here live when he asks, please get your hand up and one of our wonderful minions will hand you a microphone. And if you're in the World Wide Web, please just put them in the comments and one of our wonderful people will pick them up. And again, we'll be able to ask Justin. So, ladies and gentlemen, Wunderman Thompson's Justin Peyton. And no, we have to be...
We have to be where?
Distanced.
Distanced.
Yes, there we go.
There we are.
Did the social distancing people hear me say that? Good.
Yeah, there we go. We're good.
Welcome to Gaming Matters. Justin, I'm going to leave you to do your presentation, but I'm asking everyone the same question, just probably to age us. What was your first game?
This definitely will age me. So I grew up in Palo Alto, and my oldest friend in the world, his stepfather, worked for Atari and was releasing kind of the first Atari systems. So we always had kind of the demo and pilot versions of all the Atari platforms at home.
You have to name one.
So yeah, I've aged myself a lot.
You have to name one game.
I mean, the first game you get into Pong and Space Invaders and all of that with Atari. But,
there you go.
But the one that I loved was probably a little later.
We'll play it later. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Peyton.
Hello, everyone. It is interesting to be back on stage, and I'm really glad to be here, so thank you. I'm going to take a slightly different spin probably from the conversations that people had yesterday, talk a little about Metaverse, talk about what brands are doing in the Metaverse. I'm going to talk a little about history in order to get there, though. So if we kind of go through this, the first thing is when we talk about brands really act in two ways. One, they help to shape culture, and two, they follow culture and they follow consumers, because there's this constant dynamic of trying to play with and be part of what interests people. And ultimately what interests people and what's shaping the way people behave increasingly is technology. So I start just with that. We're just doing a quick bit of setup, but obviously, you know, there's a whole lot of stats that we could throw out here, but ultimately what they all say is that consumers spend more time using technology, find more information from technology, use technology as part of their social life, use technology as part of their consumer life, use technology in every other aspect of their life. So that's that. I'm not going to go through the numbers. And then we'll talk about where Metaverse really started. And the first use of the word Metaverse was in a book called Snow Crash, which if you haven't read it, you should. It's one of the best books that's ever been written. I love it so much. I'm just rereading it now because it is that good. But this was kind of early 90s, I want to say, and it was very much this world where you had magazines like Mondo 2000 talking about virtual reality, and everything was very hardware driven rather than software driven. But it was kind of this first imagination of what the world could be and what a world of pixels could translate to and how people could immerse themselves into that 3D space. And it's amazing to see how much of that vision actually existed that far back. It's worth having a look at. How it's going now, obviously these are things that hopefully most of you will have seen. If we look at them quite specifically, you know, what are we really doing in the Metaverse? We're talking about playing. So you've got a game there with Wendy's and Fortnite. You're talking about entertainment, and I've used one example, but there are so many. Where here you've got Lil Nas and Roblox, but I mean there's so many examples that could be there. You've got this idea of learning, and there are a million examples that could be put up there. This is actually a book launch, but I could have shown so many things around learning. And lastly, we've got kind of the announcements that have come out from Facebook and a lot of work that's happening around how we can drive collaboration and work, right? So this is what people are doing, but not really how brands play. So when we look at that and we extrapolate and we say, how do brands fit into all of this, we see a few things that are really happening, right? And the first, I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these trends. So you've got gamevertising, this idea of access and exclusivity, and we're going to, as we go through the examples, you're going to see a lot of fashion. And that is because there is a lot of overlap between what you can do with imagination, with pushing culture, and fashion brands have tended to really be at the forefront of culture. So there's a lot that you're going to see there. We're going to talk about commerce. We're going to talk about community. So those are the four trends I'm going to talk about today. Game advertising, I think, is probably the one that we all have seen a whole lot on. There's a lot of press about some of the mashups that exist here. I've put a stat in here, not that this is news to anybody in this room, but I think it's really important to look at the revenue, and most importantly, the revenue growth that comes within this kind of game advertising arena and gaming access. So when we talk about gaming in general, we're talking about a business that's growing exponentially. And when we talk about brands, what do brands want? Brands want two things above and beyond all else. They want reach and they want engagement when they talk about their marketing. And when you have a platform, or rather a channel, and let's call gaming a channel for right now, that is growing at an exponential pace like this, it immediately attracts brands to think about how they can do something interesting. What can they do in that space? And so you wind up with these. I like this image where you've got Hellman's mayonnaise building within a kind of Nintendo environment in order to put together a nice little island. You saw Sentosa do the same sort of thing. And these things become fun. They become ways of engaging. They become things that will attract people, and they drive that awareness, et cetera. They're not selling anything, but they are building the PR, the publicity, the reach, and the engagement for people to actually do that. As we go further and kind of look at all the other areas where game advertising exists, you see a huge number of partnerships that are coming out. And here, again, I said we were going to talk a lot about fashion. You can see two examples that are both fashion in the images. The first one being kind of Burberry and what they've been doing, and the one on the bottom being Vans working within Roblox. And Roblox is seeing an increasing number of brands coming in. Hyundai's building a whole mobility center it might have launched already. It might be launching this month. I'm not quite sure. I'll apologize for not having looked, but when I wrote this, it hadn't been launched. But you're starting to see this space grow and grow, and that's because if we think about the access they actually have in this environment and the number of people they have, as I mentioned before, we're seeing investments into the gaming space that are greater than film, that are greater than music, and you're also seeing the opportunity to then change product placement from being something that's passive to something that's active, right? So product placement within a film environment, we look at Bond has just come out, which is probably the most famous film for product placement. Omega's advertising like crazy on the back of it, but typically they'll do cars, they'll do a bunch, and because Bond is such a property. But that's passive. You watch it, you hope you catch their attention, you can advertise on the back of it in partnership. This is much more active, and you can actually get people to engage and be part of working with your brand in that environment. It becomes much more interesting for the brands. And then you wind up with elements like this, and I'll apologize for how quickly this flashes back and forth. It kind of makes my head spin, but I couldn't slow it down for some reason. But you've got Gucci working with the North Face, working with Pokemon Go to create kind of Pokemon Go in a Pokemon Go environment to build themselves up. And then you've got them working with a brand out of South Korea called Zepeto to create these kind of avatar-like figures that can exist in this virtual environment as well. So Pokemon Go, obviously not quite full metaverse, but you're starting to see that game advertising element and the partnerships that can exist there, and Zepeto being much more metaverse, being full avatar, and the outfits that are being created there while branded Gucci don't necessarily exist in real life. As you can see, they're a little bit over real or surreal in what they are. But you're starting to see brands play more and more in that environment. And we've seen a lot of it in the past with the kind of partnerships that Louis Vuitton did with League of Legends, et cetera, but I know that everybody here is probably familiar with those, so I didn't want to put them into a deck. And most recently, you're starting to see the kind of NFT gaming space take off, and the play-to-earn space and all of that, but brands are really looking at how they can participate in that as well. And most notably, I think the work that Stella Artois did with Zed Run to kind of create NFT horses, and you can participate in that sort of environment. But we're gonna see a lot more of that. I don't think that there's, I work with a lot of different brands, and I don't think there's any that aren't interested in what's happening in the NFT space and what it could mean for them. There aren't that many that I'm working with right now that are active and trying to build something, but there's nobody who's not interested in trying to figure out what the opportunity looks like for them. And then obviously you've got a number of brands who are building fully immersive, fully branded gaming environments in order to really bring their characters, their brands, the bespoke environments that they create to life. And Louis Vuitton is just one of many to do that. This is again, not full metaverse, but I just love this as an example. And I think that when we talk about metaverse, I think we're going to see a slippery slope as to how brands participate. And this example is going to be one on that slippery slope, where you've got kind of full immersive, where you get your brand into a 3D environment, like the Roblox Vans example that I just showed. But you're also going to have the halfway step, where it's more of an augmented reality environment, and that's going to carry people and effectively create a real-world digital divide. And if we look at this, hopefully the film will play when I push the button. There we go. But you can see that they've created a beer can that's just an augmented reality beer can that takes you to Space Invaders, which of course is one of the greatest games that you can ever play. It's Space Invaders. And you can see exactly how that works, and it's all promotable within social media, and it's a really interesting element that exists there. And I think you're going to start seeing more and more of the kind of crossover elements that exist. What was interesting about that is that the barrier to entry into those kind of augmented reality environments always used to be a QR code. And that was a huge barrier. I think over the past 2 years, we've all gotten used to QR codes, but actually, while we've gotten used to them for essentials, we don't necessarily use them as optional elements. And what's really nice about that work is there's no QR code. It just recognizes the can, and it can just automatically trigger off of something that way. The next thing we're going to talk about is access and exclusivity. This is probably one of the biggest areas that you're going to see, but what's really interesting in the explosive growth area is what I'm calling direct to avatar. And this idea that brands, specifically fashion brands right now, is what we're seeing, are creating elements that don't exist in the real world. They're creating fashion that does not exist in a real space and only exists in the virtual space. But they're not just creating it, they're actually selling it, and they're making a ton of money selling it. So you've seen, if we go to the, I'm going to skip backwards a little bit, but you've seen brands like, I can never remember what they're called, RTFKT, selling sneakers that are purely virtual and making millions off what are virtual sneakers. There's a brand in New York that did the same thing, only if you bought the virtual sneakers and they were selling virtual Yeezys for your avatar in-game, and if you bought the virtual ones, they delivered the real Yeezys to your home as well. So you're starting to see that kind of commerce bridge start to exist as well in that sense. And you're starting to see more and more brands look at this not just as an interesting thing for promotion, but actually a real source of revenue as time goes on. So this is an example from Gucci. It's called the Gucci Sneaker Garage, and they created, I want to say there were about 50 pairs of sneakers that you could kind of go through and customize a little bit, change them a little bit in order to wear them, again, direct to avatar. These are not elements that were available in a real space, but you could buy them from Gucci, bring them into Roblox, bring them into VR chat, bring them into that kind of environment in order to do things. And they weren't expensive. They're selling for $13, right? But what does it do? It gets an audience into Gucci who might not necessarily be there to begin with, and it makes Gucci a very cool brand within the upcoming cultural area, right? This is about upcoming culture rather than top-down culture, and that's the really interesting element of it, is there's a different way of approaching culture when you start looking at things like this. When we talk about virtual possessions, and we talk about buying things direct to avatar, the question becomes, how much are people willing to spend, right? $13 for a pair of Gucci sneakers that you can wear as an avatar, that's not a huge amount of money. But what you're starting to see, and we ran a survey, and this is UK data, so I'll apologize because I don't have data from the region. But we ran a survey in the UK where we asked people, what are they willing to spend on virtual possessions? And we asked an audience that's obviously already spending on virtual possessions, so they're engaged. But when you start to see that audience and what they say, the numbers are actually significant, and they're staggeringly significant. This is a high growth area, and it's an area where you're going to see people spending not small sums of money. And the interesting thing about it, if I look at it and we compare this to kind of an NFT space or something like that, is you're also seeing people who are buying in this space, and they're buying with a digital currency most of the time. There is a different tolerance that you're starting to see as to what they're willing to spend on using a virtual currency that they expect to increase in value versus the tolerance of what they're willing to spend using hard cash. So the same elements become easier to spend just because they're using a currency that they're bullish on and they expect to gain value versus the fiat currency that they're used to. Anyways, hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to talk quickly about retail. This is an image from Farfetch. They are doing a lot in the space with augmented reality to be able to really help people to visualize different articles of clothing on their person, be able to see what's happening, be able to bring all that in. And you can start to see with that how important that actually is through the numbers that are up here, through the kind of the figures of 12 billion by 2025, and these kinds of figures are huge. You're getting some really interesting elements though beyond that, where Tumi has put together a virtual store. This is Burberry's virtual store. There are a bunch of virtual stores that are starting to exist where people are recreating a physical space, allowing people to navigate through that physical space, allowing people to interact with virtual items within that physical space and buy them direct from what is a completely virtual space. So in short, a virtual replica of a physical store. The interesting side of this is how that paradigm is going to start to change. So right now, what we're doing in most of these environments is we're recreating real life, right? We're taking the virtual world and we're recreating a real life because that's the shopping experience people are used to. That's the shopping experience that people know how to engage with. But this is an area that's going to continue to develop, and I will guarantee that you're going to get to a much deeper view where what you're going to see from people very soon is people be able to take something off the shelf and break it into its component parts. So in the way that you used to see things like Apple, as you would scroll down the Apple website, you'd kind of see the laptops come apart and see a zoom in on the chip and the whole bit. You're going to start to see exactly that within these virtual stores where you'll be able to pick up at anything. If for a brand that might have a purpose around sustainability, if they pull clothing off of a rack, you would probably be able to see all of the sustainability and all of the supply chain elements. These are the elements that people are going to start overlaying in order to bring purpose to the forefront in this kind of more metaversal shopping experience. And then at the same time, you're seeing a whole different side of it as well. And this is a company called 4K. And what they're doing is they're taking physical assets, your Rolex, a painting. There's a lot of watches on this site right now. So I went to Rolex first. But they're going to take those physical assets and they're going to turn each of them into an NFT. And they're turning them into an NFT so that you can buy them in the virtual space and have them. But they actually have a physical Rolex for that NFT. And if you want the physical, if you buy the NFT, you can have the Rolex. Buying the NFT is the same as buying the Rolex. You're going to pay the same price. You might pay more for the NFT because you have a virtual version of it as well. But once you buy it, the NFT, you own that Rolex. But they keep it. They don't send you the Rolex. They keep the Rolex. They keep it in a vault. It's theirs. If you want the Rolex, you tell them, and they'll burn the NFT. So you're starting to see these elements where, so in short, you can buy it and you'll own both technically, but you can only physically have possession. You can only realistically have possession of one, either the physical product or the digital product. You cannot have both. And it's a really interesting concept as to how people are going to start using NFTs to be able to store investments and hold them as a store of value and what's going to happen in that. And you're going to start seeing fractional ownership as a result of that. So that's where brands are going to go, is they're going to be able to start offering fractional ownership. Last part that I said I would talk about, I know we're running short on time, so I'll be really punchy, is kind of communities and what's happening with metaverse communities. So Met Gala, biggest fashion event, biggest celebrity event of the year in New York, at exactly the same time as Met Gala this year, there was a big crypto conference, and they launched Meta Gala at exactly the same time. So this is a virtual event where you can see everybody coming in pure virtual fashion, but where you attracted the crypto elite in order to come in. You're also seeing that kind of community come in a big way through sports. So you're seeing sports teams, sports community franchises, sports coins coming in, where if you're a Paris Saint-Germain fan or any other football fan for the most part, you can buy into a coin, and that coin can appreciate in value based on performance of the team or based on people being willing to buy, well, obviously based on market action, but the market action is typically dominated by popularity of the franchise and expectation from the franchise. So the interesting side of that community element is when Messi transferred from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain, part of his contract was in this token. And so that was a giant endorsement for this kind of community element, but you're starting to see more and more people participating in that way. The last thing I'm really going to talk about is I'm just going to kind of give you 3 what-ifs, right, as what-if elements to think about where things are going. And not all these are really as brand-focused as I wish they were. The first one is the only one that isn't. But if we think about where Metaverse is really going, and we think about what I'm sure people here have been talking about with gaming, like play-to-earn models, imagine how play-to-earn is going to impact a business like Uber, where you wind up with a whole different element. Right now, that gig economy is based on an hourly wage or based on those kinds of elements, but what if for each ride you wound up with a token and you created a token economy to that, and what if Uber was then able to in one way commoditize the value of that token or increase the value of that token? Then all of a sudden you wind up with a whole different type of function of how that gig economy is going to work. From a CRM perspective, it becomes even more interesting. What if Mercedes or any luxury car brand decided that they were going to stop giving you a car title when you buy a car? And what they're going to give you, they're going to translate that car title to be an NFT. So now when you buy your luxury car, you don't get a piece of paper, you get an NFT that says you own it. Well, that NFT is an open blockchain space. So now whenever you take the car to go get it serviced, someone's going to write that on the blockchain, so all of a sudden every service record is going to be captured, and there's going to be no fraud. Singapore, fraud's not a big deal, but I'm an American. We're used to things like those things. They do happen sometimes. Not a big problem, but it does happen with cars, right? So, but now that problem would disappear. So what if we did that, and what if we went a step further and we think about what that means now in terms of other people wanting to talk to a luxury car owner. So if there's a hotel brand that wants to talk to luxury car owners as an audience, well, they might very easily be able to look at that open blockchain and say, actually, we can just start dropping in our messages to their wallets. So you're going to get precision marketing within CRM, high precision marketing from a targeting perspective based on NFT ownership. And the last thing, I started talking about fashion, so I'll finish with talking about fashion, is I don't know how many people in this room are really looking at the NFT space, but one of the biggest NFTs out there right now is one called Bored Ape Yacht Club. And cool images, 10,000 NFTs, super high value at this point, very active community on Twitter, very active community overall, and they're looking at their brand power, but they are ultimately, if I look at them, they're becoming the supreme of the NFT space. And we're going to start seeing these kinds of partnerships in a really big way, where these kinds of NFT communities that people are creating are going to have a whole lot of power. Anyways, hopefully that's interesting. I see a couple questions, but I'm going to say thank you first, and then we'll answer a couple questions. And I can see, so I'll read out the questions that I see there. One is, would Louis Vuitton be considered a pioneer of cross-promoting gaming with brands when they partnered with Square Enix to feature Lightning from Final Fantasy? I think who's a pioneer and who's not is a really hard question to answer right now. I would still say we're really early in the growth of this space for brands, and I would say every brand that's working in this space is a pioneer. We're at the beginning stages of what's going to happen. There's a huge amount of partnership and a huge amount of overlap opportunities that are left to explore. So would they be a pioneer? Yes. But that doesn't mean they are the pioneer. I think most everyone is a pioneer at this point. And then the next question that I have here is, when would you say a brand goes overboard with cross-promotion in games? I think this is a really good and delicate question to ask. The answer is that brand guardians need to be careful all the time. And the truth is one thing, they go overboard when they're not being honest about what their brand actually stands for, or when they're not being genuine in terms of who the audience is that they're talking to. but in the way that marketing as a practice is really a very consumer-centric practice. Going overboard is about being disingenuous to the audience and to the consumer that you're trying to target and that you're trying to talk to and who thinks that you are relevant. But where that line is going to be different for every brand, and it's going to be different for every circumstance. It's about that. And the last question I have here is, on the Hub City Brewing, curious to know what was the consumer reception? I don't know, to be really honest. It's a very new thing that's just launched. I just happen to love it, so I'm sharing it because I think it looks cool, and I think it's great fun, and I'd love to see more people do it, but I don't actually have an answer as to what the reaction has been. I have no idea. Apologies. Anything else? I can't see any hands, but the lights are directly in my eyes. So,
do we have any questions from the, what's the opposite of the metaverse? The real world. Universe, the real world. Any questions for Justin? We have one here. I think that's Stephen Dowler.
Hey, how are you? Is this on?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to you speak about this. I'm wondering, are you seeing, obviously you're seeing communities gather in fashion, I'm guessing in real estate with things like Decentraland and that kind of thing. Where else are you starting to see NFT communities really rally behind, in terms of how the technology is being applied?
From a community perspective, I think that what you're seeing is access to exclusivity is where you're seeing a lot right now. So from a community perspective, you're seeing art, fashion, a little bit on the real estate side, although that's, while it's available, I'm not sure whether I'd call it a huge and active, as active from a community perspective as the other two, but it's rapidly growing. The interesting side of it to me, if we talk about NFTs, is that right now everyone's thinking about NFTs as just a JPEG. But the interesting side is where that has the opportunity to kind of take us and what can actually start to fit underneath that. And the example that I gave of kind of a luxury car brand using an NFT as a title starts to create defined communities of people with fixed entry into that community, and entry would be ownership. And so I think we're really at the beginning of seeing what that community actually means, but we're going to see NFTs as kind of a token metric that create communities and create hard boundaries to those communities in some cases, soft boundaries in others, but where people can really find access to the community. And that's the interesting side. But I mean, the biggest ones that you're seeing right now are sports franchises, fashion, that area. These are the areas where people have always leaned, so the areas where people have always traditionally leaned into community. They're going to be the pioneers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think there's a lot more questions, but we've run out of time. But Justin, before we get too close to each other, your presentation had lots of great insights, lots of information. Hopefully we can share some, if not all of it, with the crowd. But if you were to compress all of that into one insight, what's the most exciting thing for you today about the metaverse?
That's the two things that are exciting. I'm only going to compress it into two because one is just a sentence. The two things that are exciting to me is, one is we're just at the beginning. Like, we are so early in this. It's going to happen really fast, but we are so early in this space that it's there. And the other, to me, is that it tears down a lot of the conventional walls that existed, and it's giving people new access to I was talking with people the other day and saying we're redefining national boundaries when we start looking at this, because are you more part of a community token, or are you more part of a national identity? What is your identity, and how does that actually fit? We're going to start to see these things really start to shift, and I don't know where that lands, but I do think it's exciting to watch.
Cool. Well, Justin, thank you so much. And I know that you've actually jumped away from a staycation to be with us today. So please, back to your family in the real life. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you very much.
Justin Peyton.
Thanks.